Okay, so Bezras Hashem, tonight we're going to continue trying to live with the times, trying to hold on to the Torah in in times when it's hard to hold on to the Torah. But as the pasuk says, "Lulei sarascha sha'ashuai azavadati bioni." If it were not for the Torah, which is my plaything, then I would have been lost in my impoverishment. And each and every person is impoverished, and the world is impoverished, and only HaKadosh Baruch Hu is rich. But ultimately, in a world that seems to be destitute, in a world that seems to be difficult, so the schus is that we have the Torah, and the way that the Torah enlivens a person in times of difficulty is expressed in the pasuk, Sha'ashuai, lulei sarascha sha'ashuai, if it were not for the Torah, which were my plaything. Now, sha'ashuim is one of the most incredible words, one of the most untranslatable words in the Torah. But sha'ashua means an inner experience of joy, a back and forth that is not quite expressed externally yet as a manifestation, but rather the burgeoning and the growth of joy, a joy that begins to rumble, just as a wave emerges from a rumbling that takes place far beneath the surface of the water. So too does the sha'ashua, that inner movement, that friction of sorts, but not a negative friction, a friction that is born out of love and undying desire to move elsewhere and to return. Those nekudos of hitznotzitzutz, that spark of the sha'ashua, is described in the writings of the Malbush, in the Emek HaMelech, in the Lashem Sheba V'chalaima, in the Rebbe's writings. That movement of sha'ashua is what gives birth to the joy, because yes, we can't necessarily be megala simcha b'chutz yet. A person looks around at the world, a person looks around at whatever moment a person is going through. The week, by definition, is a week that makes it hard to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But the goal is to find the sha'ashua, to find that inner joy. And the sha'ashua, as we know, is the hamshacha of the highest lights in the world. Shin Ayin represents the highest light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu imaginable, drawing down this this quiet joy that calms a person that calms a person inwardly. To draw that down, it comes from a place of Shanuhurin. It's the place of Keser. It's the place of Ratzon B'litam. Those Shanuhurim, those lights that emerge specifically from that place that we can't ever imagine light to emerge from. Those Sha'ashuan Ha'elyonim that are drawn down. We see in the Haggadah, the Arizal points out that Maisa, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Maisa with Rabbi Akiva and Ben Ebrak, that Maisa is the Shama. It's Shin Ayin being drawn down to the question of Ma. The entire element of the Seder is to ask and understand the secret of Ma. What, why, how, questioning, the world of questioning, the ability for a Jewish person to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the She'ela, to say, Ma, what is it? How is it? What's it going to be? The entire edifice of Pesach itself is built upon questioning. As we know, that questioning is not symptomatic of the night, but rather it's constitutive of the night. Questioning is the essence of the night of Pesach, as Halacha brings down that you have to say the Haggadah over B'derech She'ela V'tshuva. And even if you're a singular individual, you have to say it over B'derech She'ela V'tshuva, because that secret of that secret of learning how to experience what it means to be a questioning person, is only answered when we learn how to draw the Shanuhurin into Ma, when we learn how to draw down that silent inner joy, that that Sha'ashua, which is the word Maisa, Shin, Ayin, and Ma. It's drawing down the light of Keser, that light of calmness, specifically into the questioning itself. That's Maisa Haya, it was a Maisa, that's the light of the Seder, where we learn how to see the Shanuhurin. And that or of the Shanuhurin, of the Sha'ashuin Da'araisa, of that inner joy that comes specifically to answer questions, is also the joy that we find in this week's Parsha. It just so happens that this week's Parsha teaches us how to live within the question itself, how to live as a question. That's the Iker Tachlis, as we're going to see in this week's Parsha. And as Mamela, if this week's Parsha of the Metzora is teaching us how to ask a question, then the times that we find ourselves in, which are completely oriented towards questions, and the Chag of Pesach, which is completely oriented towards questions, it has to contain within itself that secret of the Sha'ashuin, that joy, that pleasure, that Shanuhurin that comes down to shine the light of Keser, of indestructible will and light and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ultimate goodness in every single situation and the perpetual geula and the Nekuda of Emes and everything. So that Shah Nehurin has to be in there somewhere. We have to learn how to draw that Shah Nehurin, the light of Keser, into the question itself, to uncover the Sha'ashuin D'Oraisa, that inner experience. And we find, the Oyev Yisrael points it out, but I believe the Arizal brings it down. It's also the Oyev Yisrael's yard site tonight, as far as I know. I believe it is. I saw that online earlier. But the Oyev Yisrael says an incredible thing. The Oyev Yisrael says that the Kohen, in order to be matakin the Metzora, in order to undo the impurity or signify the beginning of a shift from impurity into purity, that the Kohen Gadol had to bring two birds, two tziporim as a korban. And tzipor, says the Oyev Yisrael, is the gematria of Shah, of 370. So the secret of the questions that a person finds themselves in as a result of tzara'as is going to be answered ultimately through the tahara of the tzipurim, to be like a bird that lives in questioning, to be like a bird that flies around to and fro without needing any particular space to camp oneself in order to be present. Like Moshe Rabbeinu, who davened to be like a bird. And the Piazat Rebbe Hashem Yom Komdomo, who describes at the end of Savazirus how understandable that request is, to be like a bird, to fly away, to move, to be me'ofef. Like the pasuk says, Mi yitain li iver kayona, who would give me a wing like a dove so I could fly, with one wing on the floor and one wing in the air, as the Malbim HaKadosh says, to be like a tzipor, to draw those shanuhurin, those lights of Keser, that light of the Or of Shabbos, into the questioning, into the Ma. And that will give us the koyach of lule sayrascha sha'ashuai azavadati be'oni. If I did not understand the secret of the sha'ashuim of Torah, the secret of Torah moving internally, within the question itself, the Mineu Bey, the secret of in and of itself, or the Nakuda of a person asking himself and offering answers to the very questions one asks themselves, to question oneself and offer answers from within the very question itself. And that's the koyach of the Sha'ashuin, the Orais, and that's the koyach of the Tahar of the Metzora, as the Oyev Yisrael, whose our yard said it is, tells us. And we're going to see that tonight's Inyan Be'ezras Hashem is going to be ultimately the question of what it means to be put into question, what it means to be a Metzora, what it means to live as and in and through the question, so that we can arrive at Pesach Bezras Hashem, which, as the Sod Yisharim points out, is the Giloy of the Or HaShe'ela. It's the revelation of the light of questioning, how questioning represents the highest level imaginable, and Avodas Hashem represents the Bakasha, Ubikashta Misham, and yearning to come close. So the pasuk says, Be'ezras Hashem, in Parak Yud Gimel, hold on, I just want to make sure I have the right pasuk. So the pasuk is telling us, I'm sorry, I can't find the pasuk right now. Pasuk is telling us that when a person has a house that has a questionable status of tzara'as, so what a person is meant to do is they're not meant to say that there's most certainly tzara'as, but rather they're meant to go out and seek out the insight of the Kohen to reveal whether that house has tzara'as or not. And the proof text to this reality that a person cannot proclaim tzara'as in and of them own opinions, and they have to go and find the Kohen, is brought from the pasuk of a person is in their house and they find something that looks kanega nirali. It appears to me as a blemish, kanega nirali. And what Rashi says, beferish, pointing out this extra chaf hadimyon, that it's not a nega that appears to me, it's not a blemish in the home that appears to me of tzara'as in the house, but it appears to be a possible tzara'as, a doubtful, a potential state of tzara'as. And Rashi says that from here we learn that even if a person is a Talmid Chacham, even if a person knows with absolute certainty the reality of the status of that nega in their house, they still should not make a decision for themselves with regards to the impurity of the home, but rather they should go and ask insight from a Kohen. That's why it says ka nega, because the individual, even the Talmud Chacham, even if they know it's an actual nega, even if they know it's an actual blemish, an actual issue, the individual is meant to make it dependent, contingent on some future clarification of the Kohen. It stands in a state of doubt. Kanega, it's not certain, and a person doesn't have the ability to be matama their house on their own. A person cannot testify to the impurity of their home. There's a mitzvah miyuchedes. There's a specific mitzvah of going out and asking the Kohen to come and check in on the status of the house, to check in on the condition, even if the individual themselves would know. And that's why it says kanega. And there's a Metzora on that pasuk. There's a beis b'Metzora. And what the Metzora tells us is that this kanega nirali, it appears to me that this is a blemish, as the Baal Turim points out, and the Mefarshei HaMetzora point out, the pasuk of nira, the gezerah shava of the fact that the word nira is brought here, kanega nirali, it appears to me in my mind's eye, specifically the sense of vision, immediately connects us to the pasuk of merachok Hashem nirali. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to me from a distance. And that place of merachok Hashem nirali, that place of kanega nirali, that place of standing within the chaf hadimyon, standing within that site of uncertainty, not knowing with certainty, being caught up in a state of doubt as to what the actual status is, brings us directly in contact, spiritually and textually, with the reality of merachok Hashem nirali, that very often it appears that HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to be by way of a distance. The concept of tsara'as, the concept of what the Zohar HaKadosh refers to as segiru dinehurin, the closing off of the lights, the loss of the light of chachma, the inability to see the big picture of something anymore, the inability to see how things actually are, not as they simply appear, but as they actually are in their spiritual essence. When I lose that ability of the nehurin, of that light of my mind that allows me to see things in a whole, I immediately fall into that space of tsara'as. I fall into that space of lashon hara. I fall into that space of self-certitude. Lashon hara, on a certain level, is speaking with certainty about another person, but it's a certainty that emerges out of our terror of uncertainty. Because I'm uncomfortable with myself, because I don't know the certitude of myself, or who I am, or my value, or what I'm worth, or what my actions are actually indicative of. If I'm totally v'safek, if I doubt myself completely, then I'm going to try and grab hold of any certainty in my life, and the only certainty I can have is an ayin hara, to look bad at another person. I don't know about myself, but what I can be certain in is that person is wrong also, or that person is also broken. And a person begins to speak lashon hara, begins to see the world negatively, specifically when they lack the certainty of themselves. Certainty that an individual needs in order to be comfortable with themselves, to not speak lashon hara. That light of chachma, it's a comfortability with not knowing the essence of who we are. Try as we might, we're not going to uncover the essence of who we are. But when a person is terrified of that, when a person feels that without certainty, I have no ground to stand upon, without certainty, my identity becomes wounded, without knowing with absolute certainty that I'm loved, that I'm seen, that I'm acknowledged, there's a terror in the face of that uncertainty, so we try and grab hold of any certitude that is going to satisfy us. And what comes most easily to us is to look at the world negatively, to look at other people negatively, to speak lashon hara, to speak negatively about another person, to see separation, again, like we spoke about last week. When I lose that vision of chachma, I begin speaking lashon hara because I'm no longer comfortable with myself. I no longer see myself as a cohesive unit. I need affirmation. And in the absence of affirmation, because no matter what affirmation a person gets, it's never enough affirmation, because the affirmation that one needs is always one step beyond the affirmation that one gets. That's the klala of Kayin, that's the Nav and Nadia Ba'aretz. But when I feel that I don't have the affirmation that I need, so then I begin affirming myself by way of denying the other. I begin building myself up specifically on another person, specifically on another person's misdeeds or misrepresentations. That's the Nakuda of Lashon Hara. It's a need to speak about another person because I feel so uncomfortable within myself that at least I could spend time breaking another person down. That happens when we lose the vision of Chachma, the Segiru Dinahurin, and then we enter into a state of tsaras, of being a Metzora, of being a leper, of being chutz lamachana, no longer being able to see cohesiveness, calmness, always living with a sense of they can take from me and they can take from me and there's not enough, as opposed to the world of Chachma, which is enoughness, which is dai l'chakima biramiza. Dai l'chakima biramiza, meaning the level of Chachma, it's enough with just a hint because I don't need the whole thing. I see myself as a cohesive whole. Mali ledaber al achirim. What version, what possible version of goodness can emerge from me talking about another person? But in the world of Bina, in the world of Segiru Dinahurin, in a world of Lashon Hara, in a world of falling into the death of speech, into that exile of speech, where speech is no longer utilized to express connectivity, but rather used as swords that sever connection, which is the negative language of Paro, which is the negative place of Mitzrayim, when we fall into that world of separateness and use our language and our ways of communicating to break another person down for the sake of building a person up. So then we fall into a place of Lashon Hara, of concealment, of needing to see the deficiency in the other. And what the Torah HaKadosh is perhaps teaching us on a certain level is that if a person finds themselves surrounded by tsaras, if tsaras has infiltrated into a person's home, if tsaras no longer just affects the person's body as they're outside the home, but it affects the home as well, a person doesn't even have a safe place to go to anymore. Typically, there's an Adam and there's a bias. The Adam goes into the bias and out of the bias. If the Adam is defiled in one way or another, at least they could return to their bias where they can cultivate a sense of silent Kedusha, of Sha'ashua, of joy, of experience, of happiness and gladness. But then there comes a darga when a person enters into Eretz Canaan in the beginning, when a person goes into that place of hachna'ah, of learning what it means to acknowledge the smallness of the self, to learn how to properly diminish one's sense of self in the healthiest way possible. What's going to happen, B'derech Klal, is we're going to find saras on our bias. Even the calmness of our homes are going to begin to be attacked with the possibility of infection, with the possibility of defilement, with the possibility of concealment and Segiru Dinahurin. That even the Chachma HaBayis, even the Chachma of the house, Bereshis, B'Chachma, that the Beis Reshis, that place of homeness, of homeliness, that place of Chachma, even that place begins to be defiled a little bit. And so the Torah's Eitzah is don't look at it with certainty. Stop demanding certainty. You don't need the certainty. Don't say nega hayali. Don't say it's terrible. Don't say it's an actual nega with absolute certainty. I don't need anybody else's advice. I'm the judge and I'm the jury and I'm the executioner of the reality of this moment. Rather say ka nega nirali. You should say it appears to me as if it might be a nega. It might be a blemish. Because ultimately, it's not on us to interpret our maladies. It's on us to bring it to the Kohen. Even if we know with certainty how defiled we are, even if we know with absolute certainty that the home is defiled, that the body, that the mind has all been covered over in whatever way it gets covered over by tsaras, when the lights go out in a person's mind, that's Segiru Dinahurin, that's tsaras, that being caught up in the Gullus Hadibor, in that exiled speech, which only echoes within my own mind and forces me to speak negatively about another person. Even though I know I'm there, it's Gam Kielach Beget Samaves Lo Yirora Kiati Madi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, don't say it with certainty. Say Kanega Nirali. Put yourself in doubt. Maybe you don't know. Maybe we don't know. Maybe we can't trust our deeply held knowledge and belief about what our actual value and worth is. Maybe we're biased. Maybe we can't be made on ourselves. Because the Adam is Karaves al Atzmo, and a person sees all Negaim chutz me Negay Atzmo. A person can see all the Negaim in the world except for the Negaim within themselves. And B'derech Klal, what that means is that I look at the faults in everybody else, but I'm unwilling to look at the faults in myself as if I'm arrogant. But in truth, what it might also mean is that even when I see my own faults, even when I believe so deeply in my own faults, it's not up to me. Kol Negaim Adam Roa, a person can see all the other Negaim, but they can't see their own Negaim. Even when you see them, you can't see them. It's not your eyes to see. You have to bring it to the Kohen. Even if you're a Talmid Chacham, even if you know with absolute certainty, the Iker Avoida is to understand that sometimes it's Merachok Hashem Nirali, like the Metzora points out. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to me when I acknowledge that I don't know. What we learn in Parshas Parah is what Shlomo HaMelech, the smartest individual in the world, says, the Merkava to Chachma Shlomo, the Merkava to Chachma on a smaller level. I thought I was wise, and it's distant from me. It's distant. I thought I was wise. I thought I understood. I thought I knew the status of my condition. I thought I could say, because I'm a Talmid Chacham, that negahu, it's deficient. The world is deficient. The situation is deficient. I'm deficient. Chas v'shalom. And what the Torah is teaching us is that no, say kanega, it makes absolutely no difference. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears specifically when you realize, I thought I had it, but rechoika mimeni, it's far from me. Rachok Hashem nirali. That nirali, that it appears to me, is the willingness of an individual to allow ourselves for but a moment to possibly be wrong. Not wrong in a deficient type of way of getting the answer wrong, but wrong in the sense that perhaps all of our assumptions and deeply held beliefs that keep us stuck in negative behaviors and gullus and the cutting edge of exile that seeks separation rather than unification and interconnection, that perhaps I'm wrong about my assumptions in this world. Perhaps I should just walk with a little bit more tmimus and pshitus, with simplicity, and bring my negaim to the Kohen and allow the Kohen to say what the status is. It's not enough for us to feel that we can take our spiritual temperature at every moment. This is why a person needs to find tzaddikim, both in this world and in the Svarim, or rebbeim. Because a Rebbe is a Kohen, it's somebody a person can go to and say, here is my nega, look at it, it's kanega nearly, I don't know what it is, Rebbe, tell me, I don't know. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I don't know what it is. That's the avodah of turning HaKadosh Baruch Hu into one tzaddik, of tzaddiko shel olam. And I'm covering the tzaddik within each and every one of us. That amich kulam tzaddikim. That there's the amich kulam tzaddikim of each and every person. There's the tzaddik yisod olam of the tzaddikim amitim. And there's the tzaddiko shel olam, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the tzaddik yisod olam, the tzaddiks in our generation, and the tzaddikim amitim throughout the generations are, like Rabbeinu teaches us, a shadchan. There are shadchan between the tzaddik within the individual, which is amich kulam tzaddikim, and the tzaddiko shel olam, which is the tzidkus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the righteousness of all things. And then there's the tzaddik yisod olam, who has a yesod, is makasher between the amich kulam tzaddikim and the tzaddiko shel olam. Ad kedei kach, that all it is the tzaddiko shel olam. All it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A person needs to bring it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to bring my problems. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kanega nirali, it appears to me. And it could be very well that it is a nega. The Kohen might say, I'm sorry, this is total impurity. But when the Kohen says it, it's different. When the Kohen says it, there's also a promise of tikkun. Now we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved in our burden as well. It's not just my nega anymore. Now it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's nega. Now it's the tzaddik's nega. Now it's my Rebbe's nega. Now it's Knesset Yisrael's nega. When I connect my tsar to the tsar of the Shekhinah, so I'm no longer relying on my own strength to alleviate it, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is poel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the tzaddikim are poel to be mafig that tsar, to be metaher the Metzora, like the Zohar Kadosh says, to be metaher that richuk between the Shekhinah and Kudsha Barichu. When a person brings it to the Kohen says, I'll carry it. The Kohanim have big shoulders. The Kohanim are willing to carry the burden, the Negayim. And even if the tzaddik has to say, and the Kohen has to say, it's a nega, a person has to, deal with this inyan or clarify this inyan, or maybe you're right about a certain character defect that you might have. Nevertheless, it's b'darach ahava, it's by way of love, it's by way of fixing, it's with eyes of kedusha. When we look at our deficiencies, when we study ourselves with these tools of certainty, these tools of absolute knowledge, so then what we say about ourselves are ultimately very difficult to shake ourselves out of. And what begins as a cognitive deficiency and what begins as a cognitive distortion, an untrue thought that emerged into my mind one random afternoon, after years of thinking the same way in the old unhealthy thoughts, person comes to find that their mind has become an avodah zarah. It's an idol, it's a foreign idol, because now those negative thoughts have been engraved into stone and I can't break free of them. So we bring it to the Kohen and we say to the Kohen, here, kanega nirali, it appears to me that it's like a nega, and then the Kohen sees it. The Einei HaChachamim, the eyes of the Chachamim, which are mamtik. Einei Hashem Elokecha ba'aretz mereishas hashana ad achras hashana. That the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the eyes of the tzaddikim, are on Eretz Yisrael, are with Eretz Yisrael, in the houses of Eretz Yisrael, in the places of Eretz Yisrael. In every place, that's where the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is found. The light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is found specifically in that place when we bring it to the Kohen, when we bring it to somebody to say, here, this is my nega. I have this nega, I have this blemish, I have this deficiency, but now I'm sharing it. I'm sharing it with somebody, I'm sharing it with the Kohen. At that point, we begin to understand the secret of Merachok Hashem Nirali, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to me from a distance, specifically from that far place where I thought I finally gave up. I don't know anything. I don't know anything at all. At that place where I thought I'm losing hope, ultimately the Kohen comes and teaches me how to properly bring my nega, how to properly bring that deficiency. And the next pasuk tells us that the first thing the Kohen does is he cleans out the house, panuyas abayis, he cleans it out. He removes you from the problem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through his boidedus, when a person talks to another person or to HaKadosh Baruch Hu or to a friend about their problem, what we do is we separate ourselves from it. We're panuyas abayis. Take yourself out of the house. Look at the problems from a position of distance. Look at the problems with the eyes of the tzaddik. Look at the problems as not who you are, but something that you do. Not the essence of yourself, but an expression of yourself. The ultimate distinction between guilt and shame. Guilt says I have done something wrong. Shame says I am something wrong. When I'm in the bias, when I'm trying to look at the negayim of my heart, and I say with certainty they're negayim, I know they're negayim, they can never be fixed. At that point, I'm keeping myself stuck. I'm keeping myself stuck with shame. I am the problem. What the Kohen HaGadol does, what the Kohanim, what the Tzaddikim, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does, what all of the living and dead Tzaddikim do for us, is they clean out the house, panuyas abayis, vacate, make space, separate yourself from your problem. Hachna'a, havdala, hamtaka, minimize it, separate yourself from it, and sweeten it. Until you separate yourself from your problem, a person cannot objectively look at their problem. And you can't objectively remove yourself from your problem until you bring it to the tzaddik, until you bring it to the tzaddik shel olam, until you bring it to the Kohen, until you bring it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his voidedus and vidui and whatever avodah it is, to finally be honest and say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kanega nirali, I don't know. And then the Einei Hashem Elokecha, the Einayim of the tzaddik come and they either tell us, okay, so it's going to be a week of bedidut and it's going to be a week of rectifications and different tikkunim and this and that. Each person comes to their tikkun as the tzaddikim teach us, one way or another. The only bechira is whether it's going to be by way of mar dror, as Rav Yitzchak Meyer Morgenstern Shlita points out, a way of freedom and freedom of self, or is it going to be by way of marirus, of bitterness? But how we end up there, where we end up, that's not up to us. The only thing up to us is whether it's going to be by way of pleasantness or it's going to be by way of bitterness. And that's again the avodah of Leil Pesach, of engaging with the maror, is to chew the maror enough to realize that ultimately I don't want the maror. I want the matzah, I want the shulchan aruch. I don't want that bitterness. I don't want to go through the world through eyes of bitterness. I want to go to the world and I want to rectify my negaim with eyes of pleasantness, with eyes of mar dror, with freedom. But we arrive at our tikkun. And the Kohanim and the Tzaddikim and HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us our tikkunim. And our tikkunim are every Nakuda of Yisurin, bad feelings, bad thoughts, all of that is a process of Elecha Hargenu Kol Hayom, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we give our lives for you every day. That Nakuda of Mesiras Nefesh inherent within every encounter with the self, within the willingness to descend deeper and deeper into the recesses of the self, to be Matakin Midos Ra'os, to let go of character distortions and character defects, and to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Tshuva Mimamakim, in that Darga of Merachu Kashem Nirali. And the only way through this is when we uncover the secret of Kanega. It appears to me like a nega. That Chaf HaDimyon that Rabbeinu refers to as the light of Keser, the light of the Sha'ashuin. The Meshilach points this out as well with regards to Kedusha on the highest level. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Otzeisicha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am HaKadosh Baruch Hu, your God, who has taken you out of Mitzrayim. Zok the Meshiloach. Why does it not say Ani Hashem Elokecha? I am Hashem, your God. Why does it say Anochi Hashem Elokecha? Why is there a Chaf HaDimyon? Why is there an additional Chaf that appears to make it Tolui and Safek and not knowing? And Zakta Meshiloach, that in truth, we can never know anything. We can never know anything with absolute certainty. Because we're subjectively connected to everything as creatures. We can only bring it to the tzaddikim and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we can't be masig in ani. We can't grasp the ani, so to speak, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, except by way of the Chaf HaDimyon, except by way of imaginings, that at best it's still caught up in the ultimate conception of human susceptibility to error, which necessitates faith as the direct or most direct or direct through indirection path to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I let go of the need for absolute knowledge and I live in the Chaf HaDimyon. And that secret of Anoichi, of Kanega Nirali, of B'chol Dor Vador, Tzarech Adam Lirois Etzatzmai Ke'ilu Yatzam Mitzrayim, Ke'ilu, Kanega. It's all caught up in a mystery because I don't know. And when I recognize I don't know, then it's At Pasachlo. When I recognize I'm a Sha'ene Yadei Alishal, I don't even know how to ask the question, Rabbeinu Shloim. Kanega Nirali, I'm finally learning to recognize and admit that it's all a question to me. At that moment, we get the answer. At that moment, we uncover the secret of the light of the Tzadiko Shel Olam, who's able to be Mataher, who's able to say yes when you admit that you don't know. At that moment, the person connects themselves to the tzaddikim, and then there's no difference between distance and closeness. It's Merachu Kashem Nirali. Even the distance is close to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even the Segiru Dinahiru is close to you. Like Rabbeinu teaches that the tzaddik emes' job is to teach those who are below that they're above, and those who are above that they're below. To teach us that we don't know. To teach oneself to say, I don't know, to be zeicha to that darga of the sha'ashuim, of reisha lois yada, of the ultimate reality that we don't know anything, and that's the highest level of knowledge that we can grasp. And at that point, it gets brought to the Kohen, and the Kohen clears the house out. And now the Kohen is ready to address the issue. The Piyazetzner Rebbe, to end, the Piyazetzner Rebbe, Hashem Yom Kom Domer, of Kalanimus Kalman Shapira, of Piyazetzna, writes in the Eish Kodesh the entire Sefer is Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Piyazetzna Hashem Yom Kom Domer writes as follows. He says, the Medrash tells us that because the tzara'as on the houses, as the Meforshim point out, as the Bnei Yissaschar points out, were ultimately the residual impurity of the Amorayim and the Moriam and the Canaanim and the Ovdei Avodah Zarah, and that residual intensity that was encrusted within the land of Eretz Yisrael. So the homes contained a residual sense of impurity. And until they came in to reveal that those homes had sara'as on them, when they said Kanega Nirali, and then the homes would ultimately be destroyed. And what happened was that in those destroyed homes, they found the treasures that the departing and retreating nations had hid in their walls because they knew they had to escape. So as the Rebbe, as the Piyazetzner Rebbe, Hashem Yom Kom Domo, is describing the nature of the Memtes Yimei Sfira, how they appear to be dark days, but in truth represent the loftiest and brightest days. He describes it as matmoinim, hidden treasures, because it's Memtes Moinim, we count 49 days. But he says that the secret of tsaras and the bias is the secret that hidden within our deficiencies, hidden within those areas of impurity in our lives, those areas of chametz in our lives, those areas that we're most stuck in. It's specifically there that when a person works through them properly and uncovers and separates themselves and sweetens it and elevates it, and a person learns how to bring their problem to the Kohen, how to bring their problem to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how to say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, here is my list of things that are bothering me. These are the things that hurt me. These are the things that hurt me. And as Rav Nachman says, halavai, a person should recognize in their pain that, wow, the Shechina HaKadosha is letting me in on the pain that she's experiencing. And at that moment, our deficiencies and our pain is transformed into the greatest level of Kedusha, of identifying with the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. And at that moment, that darkness, that sara'as, is transformed into the beautiful treasures. All darkness contains within itself at its core a profound light, and specifically within our willingness to abandon the absolute grasp of knowledge that we feel we need in this world, we allow ourselves to live in the question, to live with the questions of Pesach, to be put into doubt, to not know, to be impoverished, to ask questions to ourselves, to continue to ask questions on the questions, and not to demand answers. The deepest answer to the question is the willingness to live in the question, that the question precedes an answer. The question is the original expression. Sha'al na'yam liyamim rishonim. You want to get to those first days, learn how to ask questions. And in that way, we learn to accept upon ourselves our ultimate sveikos, and when we connect ourselves to our ultimate sveikos, we enter into the chamber of emunah, of faith beyond absolute certainty, and we realize that the only certainty of the world is havadei shemo kenti lasso. It's the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the most certain thing, and it's so certain that it is present even within doubt itself. And we're zoicha to the Gula of Mitzrayim, to the Gula HaDibor, to the willingness to talk nicely about other people, to speak calmly about other people, to say good things about the world, to say good things about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and how wonderfully HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world, and the chasadim and the toivim and the yeshuos, the neflos, and all of the amazing things that happen each and every moment in a person's life. To have a pesach, to have a mouth that is filled with praise and gratitude for every element of chayus and chayim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu places within a person's heart or in their minds, or any nekuda of yahadus, any awareness of being Jewish, of ashreinu matov chalkenu, of eating matzah, of getting rid of chametz. And a person should learn how to see the world with eyes of kedusha and tara, with eyes of the Kohen Gadol, with eyes of the tzaddikim, with eyes of the tzaddikei shel olam, and embrace the fact that we don't know, we're besafek, and that's okay. We don't know, and that's exactly how we connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to fix that absolute idolatry of knowledge, to allow ourselves to live suspended in disbelief for a moment, so that we can taste the sweet pleasure of the sha'ashuei emunah, that playfulness of emunah, which is built specifically upon the ultimate inability to know anything. Be'ezras Hashem.